Have you ever stood in a place that felt wrong? Not just old or empty, but alive in a way that makes your skin crawl? A house that doesn't just creak or groan, but breathes, its walls watching, its shadows whispering your name when you're alone? This isn't about a haunted house, where lost souls linger in sorrow or anger. No, this is far darker, far hungrier. A possessed house isn't content to haunt. It claims you, seeping into your thoughts, your dreams, your very being until you're no longer your own. It doesn't just want you to stay, it demands you belong to it, body and soul, forever. This is the terrifying, true story of the Anderson family, who thought they'd found their dream home, a place to build memories, to grow old together. Instead, they stepped into a nightmare, a house with a mind of its own, built on blood and bound by something ancient, something that never dies. What lived within those walls wasn't a ghost. It was the house itself, and it was starving. For them, for their fear, for their lives. Once they crossed its threshold, they were marked, and no amount of running could break its hold. It was a golden September afternoon in 2018 when the Anderson family rolled into the quiet town of Blackwood, Vermont, their old minivan packed with boxes and dreams of a fresh start. Mark Anderson, a 38-year-old accountant with a quick smile and a practical mind, had just secured a promotion, a ticket out of their cramped city apartment. His wife, Laura, 35, a part-time librarian with a love for old books, had spent months searching for the perfect home for their children. Emma, 8, shy and clutching her stuffed rabbit, and Ryan, 12, perpetually glued to his phone, skeptical of anything that wasn't on a screen. The house they found was a 3-story Victorian from the 1890s, its gabled roof sagging like tired shoulders, its paint peeling in long, curling strips. With 4 bedrooms, a sprawling attic, and a deep basement, it was more than they'd hoped for, especially at a price so low it felt like a clerical error. The realtor, a jittery woman named Carol, rushed through the paperwork, avoiding questions about why it had sat empty for a decade. "A steal," Mark said, grinning as he signed, though Laura noticed Carol's hands tremble as she handed over the keys. The move-in was chaotic, with boxes strewn across the front lawn and the kids darting between rooms. The house loomed over them, its dark windows reflecting the fading sunlight like unblinking eyes. Inside, it was cold despite the warm autumn air, the air heavy with the scent of damp wood, mildew, and a faint, sour tang that reminded Laura of old medicine. The floors creaked underfoot, each step echoing through the high ceilings. Ryan, earbuds in, muttered about the lack of Wi-Fi, while Emma clung to Laura's side, her eyes wide as she stared at the staircase, spiraling up to the shadowy second floor. "It's big," she whispered, her voice small, "but it feels crowded." The neighbors kept their distance. As Mark carried a coffee table inside, he noticed an old woman across the street, her hands gnarled, her eyes sharp as she watched from her porch. "That house has a history," she said, her voice low, carried by the rustling leaves. "People don't stay long." Mark laughed, waving it off. "Every old place has a ghost story," he called back, but the woman turned away, muttering something he couldn't catch. Laura, overhearing, felt a chill, her hand tightening on a box labeled kitchen. She shook it off, blaming the long drive, but the woman's words lingered. That first night, with furniture still in disarray, they camped in the living room, sleeping bags spread on the hardwood floor. The house was too quiet, the silence thick, broken only by the occasional creak of settling beams. At 2 a.m., Emma shook Laura awake, her face pale in the moonlight filtering through the cracked curtains. "Mommy, my room's too noisy," she whispered, clutching her rabbit. Laura, groggy, sat up. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Emma's eyes darted to the ceiling, where the attic hatch loomed, its edges uneven as if recently disturbed. "The walls, they're whispering my name," she said, her voice trembling. Laura tucked her back in, blaming an overactive imagination. But as she returned to the living room, she heard a faint hum, like a voice just out of reach, coming from the attic. She checked the hatch. It was sealed, but a cold draft seeped through, carrying a whisper that sounded like "stay." Mark, half asleep, mumbled, "Old houses creak." But Laura lay awake, the hum echoing in her mind, the house's presence pressing against her like a weight. The next morning, as they unpacked, Ryan found a small, rusted key under his sleeping bag, its edges worn but intricate, as if from a long-forgotten lock. "Weird," he said, tossing it into a drawer, but Laura noticed his unease. The key didn't match any door in the house, yet it felt significant, like a piece of the house's hidden history. As she arranged Emma's toys in her room, she noticed the attic hatch again, slightly ajar, though she was certain Mark had bolted it shut. The house, it seemed, was already beginning to speak. The Anderson family's first week in their new Victorian home in Blackwood, Vermont, was a blur of unpacking boxes and navigating the quirks of an old house, but an uneasy undercurrent grew with each passing day. The sprawling, three-story structure, with its sagging gables and shadowed corners, refused to settle into the warmth of a home. Mark, ever the practical optimist, dismissed the oddities as the charm of a century-old fixer-upper, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them, its silence too heavy, its walls too alive. The air carried a persistent chill, laced with the faint, sour scent of mildew and something sharper, like antiseptic left to fester. Ryan, 12, spent most of his time trying to boost the spotty Wi-Fi, grumbling about the move, while Emma, 8, grew quieter, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly as she avoided the darker corners of her room. The first signs were subtle, easily explained away. Doors creaked open at night, swinging slowly on rusted hinges, even when Laura was sure she'd closed them. The living room chandelier flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to linger too long, though Mark's electrician friend found no faults in the wiring. "Old houses have quirks," he said, his eyes darting to the front door as he left. Ryan, skeptical but unnerved, swore he heard footsteps pacing outside his bedroom door after midnight, slow, deliberate, like bare feet dragging across wood. He checked the hallway, phone flashlight shaking, but found only dust and silence. "It's just the house settling," Mark told him, though his voice wavered, and Laura noticed him double-checking the locks that night. Emma's toys became a source of growing dread. Laura meticulously arranged them on a shelf in her daughter's room each evening. Dolls, blocks, a plastic horse. Only to find them the next morning in perfect circles on the floor, their positions too precise for a child's prank. Emma, wide-eyed, insisted she hadn't touched them. "They want to play," she whispered, pointing to the walls, her voice trembling. One morning, Laura found Emma's rag doll, its button eyes gleaming, sitting upright in the dining room, though no one had brought it downstairs. Ryan, trying to stay cool, posted about it on X. "New house is creepy. Toys moving on their own. Hashtag haunted vibes." His friends replied with laughing emojis, but he stopped joking when he found his phone, left charging by his bed, unplugged and placed in the center of his mattress, its screen open to a photo he hadn't taken, a blurry image of his room, with a dark shape in the corner. The incidents escalated. One evening, Laura was washing dishes in the kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. In the window's reflection, she saw it, a tall shadow, too thin to be human, standing just behind her, its edges blurring like smoke. Her heart stopped as she spun around, dishwater dripping from her hands. But the kitchen was empty, the air colder than it should have been. She checked the back door. It was locked, the bolt untouched. Shaking, she returned to the sink, only to see the shadow again in the glass. This time closer, its head tilted as if studying her, its form flickering like a bad signal. When she turned again, nothing. The faucet, which she'd turned off, began to drip, each drop echoing like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. She backed away, her breath catching, as the dripping formed a rhythm that sounded like her name. That night, Laura found Mark in the living room, staring at the cracked family photo they'd hung on move-in day. The glass was splintered, their faces distorted as if melted, though no one had touched it. "It's just old glass," he muttered, but his hands trembled as he took it down. Ryan, passing by, noticed a faint hum coming from the attic hatch above Emma's room. The same hatch Laura swore she'd seen shift. He climbed a chair to check, finding the bolts loose, though Mark had tightened them days ago. As he touched the hatch, a cold draft brushed his face, carrying a whisper, "Ryan," in a voice that wasn't his sister's. He stumbled back, heart racing, and posted on X, "This house isn't right. Get me out." Laura, overhearing the hum, felt the house's pulse quicken, its walls closing in, as if it were waking up, aware of their fear and feeding on it. By the second week in their new Victorian home in Blackwood, Vermont, the Anderson family could no longer dismiss the strange occurrences as quirks of an old house. The creaking doors, the toys arranged in eerie circles, and the shadow Laura saw in the kitchen window had woven a thread of dread through their daily lives. The house at 47 Maple Lane felt alive, its air thick with a palpable weight, as if it were breathing alongside them. The faint smell of mildew and antiseptic lingered, now mixed with a metallic tang that seemed to seep from the walls. Laura, her librarian's instinct for order shaken, kept a mental tally of every oddity, while Mark clung to rational explanations, though his confidence was fraying. Ryan, 12, hid his unease behind his phone, while Emma, 8, grew quieter, her stuffed rabbit a constant shield against the house's growing presence. The atmosphere thickened with each passing day, the house's pulse more pronounced. Mark, once the family's anchor, became irritable, his temper flaring over minor things. A spilled glass of juice, Emma's endless questions about her friend in the walls. His sleep was plagued by nightmares, vivid, violent dreams of dark corridors and hands clawing for shadows. Laura noticed his eyes growing bloodshot, his skin sallow, as if the house were draining him. One night, she woke at 3 a.m. to find him sitting upright in bed, his breath ragged, muttering in a deep, guttural voice that wasn't his. "They belong to me." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy, sending a shiver through her. She shook him awake, her heart pounding, but Mark blinked, confused, claiming he'd dreamed of a figure standing at the foot of their bed. A tall, thin shape with a wide, unnatural smile. "Just a nightmare," he mumbled, but his hands trembled as he reached for the bedside lamp, which flickered before steadying. The children weren't spared. Ryan woke one night, screaming, thrashing against his sheets as if pinned. "Something grabbed my legs," he cried, pointing to faint red marks on his ankles, like fingerprints pressed too hard. Laura, rushing in, found his room icy, the window closed but fogged with condensation that formed faint, claw-like scratches. Ryan, usually skeptical, refused to sleep alone after that, dragging his sleeping bag to the living room. Emma, meanwhile, spoke more about her friend who lived in the walls, a black man with a wide smile, who whispered secrets to her at night. "He says he lives here too," she told Laura, her voice distant, her eyes fixed on the attic hatch above her bed, which seemed to shift slightly whenever Laura looked away. When pressed, Emma drew a picture, a stick figure with a grinning mouth too large for its face, its eyes black voids. "He's lonely," she whispered, "but he's angry too." The house itself seemed to respond to their fear. Doors slammed shut without cause, even when no windows were open, their hinges screeching like distant cries. The basement door, which Mark had bolted after finding it ajar, was found open each morning, its lock untouched, as if inviting them into its depths. One afternoon, Laura entered the living room to find their family photo, taken on move-in day, cracked further, the glass splintering into a web that distorted their faces, making their eyes look hollow, their mouths twisted. Ryan, shaken, posted on X, "This house hates us. Pic got wrecked on its own. #HauntedAF. His followers laughed, but Laura saw the fear in his eyes, mirroring her own when she heard whispers in empty hallways, a soft, layered voice saying Laura, or stay, too clear to be imagination. One evening, as Laura tucked Emma in, she noticed the attic hatch again, now slightly ajar, though Mark had reinforced it with new bolts. A cold draft seeped through, carrying a faint hum, like a lullaby sung in a language she couldn't understand. She climbed a chair to close it, her hands shaking, and found a small, faded photograph wedged in the hatch's frame. A family from decades ago, their faces scratched out, except for one figure. A tall man in a dark suit, his smile unnaturally wide, his eyes blacked out. The back read, "Property of the house, 1892. Laura's stomach dropped. She hid the photo in a drawer, but that night, she heard the hum again, louder, coming from the walls, as if the house were singing itself awake, its presence no longer content to watch from the shadows. 3 weeks into their life at 47 Maple Lane, the Anderson family was unraveling under the weight of the house's growing malice. The whispers, the moving toys, and the scratched-out photograph Laura found in the attic hatch had transformed their dream home into a prison of fear. The air was heavier now, thick with the sour stench of mildew, antiseptic, and a metallic tang that seemed to pulse from the walls, as if the house itself were bleeding. Laura, her librarian's need for order crumbling, kept a notebook of every incident, her hands shaking as she wrote. Ryan, 12, no longer hid behind his phone, his skepticism shattered by the claw-like marks on his ankles. Emma, 8, clung to her stuffed rabbit, whispering about her friend in the walls, her eyes distant and haunted. Mark, once the family's rock, was slipping away, his face gaunt, his temper flaring into something darker, something not his own. Mark's transformation was the most alarming. His eyes, once warm, were now sunken, ringed with shadows, his skin gray as if drained of life. He stopped going to work, claiming headaches that kept him in bed, only to disappear for hours into the basement, where the air was unnaturally cold and smelled of rust and decay. Laura followed him one night, her flashlight casting jagged beams across the concrete walls. She found him kneeling, his fingers tracing deep scratches that formed words in a jagged, unfamiliar script, symbols that seemed to writhe when she blinked. "Mark, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned, his eyes glassy, and said in a low, unfamiliar voice, "It's home. It's always been home." The words weren't his, their cadence wrong, layered with a hum that matched the house's eerie pulse. Laura backed away, her heart racing, as the scratches on the wall shifted, forming a single phrase, "Mine forever." His behavior grew violent, unpredictable. He'd lash out over nothing, snapping at Ryan for leaving a backpack on the floor, slamming doors when Emma asked for a story, then blink in confusion, claiming no memory of it. One evening at dinner, the tension snapped. Mark froze mid-sentence, his fork clattering to the table, his eyes locked on something unseen. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor, and growled in a voice too deep, too layered to be human, "Leave this house, or bleed for it." The words echoed, as if spoken by a chorus hidden in the walls. Emma screamed, dropping her plate, while Ryan scrambled back, his chair toppling. Laura's heart pounded as Mark's face twisted, his lips curling into a wide, unnatural smile that matched Emma's drawings of her friend, a grin too large, too wrong, stretching ear to ear. He blinked, collapsing into his seat, his hands shaking as he muttered, What did I say?" But the fear in his eyes showed he knew something was wrong. Laura, desperate for answers, searched the basement that night while Mark slept fitfully upstairs. Under a loose floorboard, she found the rusted metal box again, its contents now expanded. Alongside the scratched-out family photos was a brittle journal page, dated 1892, written in a trembling hand. "The house demands payment. Blood for its will. The smiling man is its voice." A faded photograph showed a tall figure in a dark suit, his smile unnaturally wide, his eyes black voids, identical to Emma's drawings. The back read, "Property of the house, 1892. Laura's blood ran cold. Whatever was in Mark wasn't a ghost. It was tied to the house itself, an entity woven into its very foundation, claiming him as its own. The house responded to her discovery. The basement door, which she'd closed, swung open, releasing a gust of icy air that carried a whisper, "Laura." Upstairs, Emma woke screaming, claiming her friend had climbed out of the walls, standing at the foot of her bed, smiling. Ryan, shaken, found his phone, left charging. Now on the floor, its screen displaying a new photo. Mark in the basement, his eyes black, his smile wide, though he'd been alone. Laura's notebook, left on the kitchen table, had a new entry she hadn't written. You're ours. The house wasn't just watching. It was inside them, twisting Mark's mind, marking the children, and whispering to Laura that there was no escape. The Anderson family was unraveling in the grip of 47 Maple Lane, the Victorian house in Blackwood, Vermont, that had turned their dream of a new start into a waking nightmare. Mark's transformation, his sunken eyes, violent outbursts, and the chilling, unnatural voice growling, "Leave this house or bleed for it," confirmed Laura's worst fears. Something was inside him, something tied to the house itself. The scratched-out photographs, the journal hinting at a blood-bound entity, and the whispers calling their names had pushed Laura to her breaking point. The house's air was suffocating now, thick with the stench of mildew, rust, and a metallic tang that seemed to pulse from the walls, as if the house were alive and starving. Ryan, 12, no longer hid behind his phone, his ankle marks burning, while Emma, 8, clung to her stuffed rabbit, whispering about this smiling man who watched her from the walls. Desperate, Laura turned to the only help she could think of, Father Matthews, a local priest known for handling troubled homes. Father Matthews arrived at dusk, a wiry man in his 60s, his face etched with quiet resolve. He carried a worn Bible, a crucifix, and a vial of holy water, his eyes scanning the house as he stepped over the threshold. The moment he entered, his breath caught, his hand tightening on the crucifix. "This place, it's heavy," he said, his voice low, as if afraid to wake something. The air grew colder, the sour smell of antiseptic sharpening, and the floorboards creaked under an unseen weight. Laura led him through the house, showing him the cracked family photo, the basement's carved symbols, and Mark, who sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, his hands twitching like marionette strings. His eyes, once warm, were now glassy, reflecting nothing but darkness. Emma, clutching Laura's arm, whispered, "He's here, Mommy. He doesn't like the priest." Father Matthews began a blessing, his voice steady as he read from Psalms, sprinkling holy water on the walls. The house reacted instantly. The chandelier flickered violently, bulbs popping with sharp cracks, casting jagged shadows that seemed to writhe. The walls groaned, a low rumble shaking the furniture, as if the house were growling. Mark's head snapped up, and he laughed, a low, guttural sound layered with voices that weren't his, echoing from the walls themselves. "You can't take them," he hissed, his eyes rolling back to reveal only whites, his lips curling into that wide, unnatural smile Emma had drawn. Laura held her children, her heart pounding, as Ryan backed against the wall, his phone forgotten, his face pale with terror. The priest pressed on, raising his crucifix and chanting in Latin, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. Mark shrieked, his body contorting, arms bending at impossible angles, head twisting as if pulled by an unseen force. The air turned arctic, the windows fogging with condensation that formed claw-like scratches, dripping like tears. The basement door, bolted shut, slammed open, releasing a gust of rancid air that smelled of blood and decay. Furniture rattled, books fell from shelves, and a mirror in the hallway cracked further, reflecting not the room but a crowd of figures, men, women, children, with scratched-out eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. Emma sobbed, "He's angry," while Ryan felt cold fingers brush his neck, leaving faint welts. Laura's notebook, left on the coffee table, flipped open on its own, a new page scrawled with red ink, "Ours forever." Father Matthews, sweat beading on his brow, pressed the crucifix to Mark's chest, shouting, "In the name of Christ, release this man." Mark's body convulsed, his screams blending with a chorus of voices from the walls, some pleading, some laughing, all inhuman. The holy water hissed as it touched him, steam rising as if burning. The house fought back, The floorboards buckled, a low hum rising to a deafening roar, and the attic hatch above Emma's room slammed open, releasing a cold draft that carried a whisper, "Leave or die." Laura clung to her children, shouting over the chaos, "Mark, fight it. You're stronger than this." But Mark's eyes glowed with a dark, endless hunger, his smile stretching wider, as if the house itself were wearing his face. The priest, undeterred, sprinkled more holy water, his prayers growing louder. The shadows on the walls thickened, forming twisted shapes, hands, faces, gaping mouths, that lunged toward him, dissolving just before touching. A photograph fell from the wall, its glass shattering, revealing a new image inside. The Andersons, their faces scratched out, standing beside the smiling man from the 1892 photo. Father Matthews, his voice hoarse, turned to Laura. "This isn't just a demon," he whispered. "The house is its vessel. It's been here since it was built." The realization hit Laura like a blow. They weren't just fighting for Mark. They were fighting the house itself, and it was winning. The blessing at 47. Maple Lane had spiraled into a war against an unseen force. The house itself, a living battlefield. Father Matthew's prayers, meant to banish the entity gripping Mark Anderson, had provoked the house's wrath, its walls groaning, windows shattering, and shadows twisting into grotesque forms. Mark, once the family's anchor, was now a vessel for something ancient and malevolent, his body contorting, his voice a chorus of inhuman tones snarling. "This is M.Y. House." Laura clung to Ryan and Emma, her heart pounding as the air grew thick with the stench of decay and a metallic tang, like blood pooling in the shadows. Ryan, 12, his skepticism shattered by the welts on his neck, pressed against his mother, while Emma, 8, sobbed, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, whispering, "He's so angry now." The house's pulse, its low, relentless hum, throbbed through the floorboards as if it were feeding on their fear. Father Matthew stood firm in the living room, his crucifix raised, his voice hoarse but unwavering as he chanted in Latin, "Exorcizo spiritus immundus." Mark's body writhed on the floor, his limbs bending at unnatural angles, his head snapping back as if pulled by invisible strings. His eyes glowed with a dark, endless hunger, his smile stretching into the wide, unnatural grin Emma had drawn, the smiling man from the walls. His voice, layered with countless others, bellowed, "They are mine." The words shook the room, rattling the chandelier until its last bulb exploded in a shower of sparks. Shadows detached from the walls, crawling across the ceiling, forming twisted faces with gaping mouths and hollow eyes that seemed to pull at the soul. Laura screamed, shielding her children as the shadows lunged, dissolving just before touching Father Matthews. The house fought back with unrelenting fury. Windows shattered inward, glass shards raining onto the floor like jagged teeth. Doors slammed shut and open in a frenzied rhythm, their hinges screeching like tortured cries. The basement door, still ajar, released a gust of icy air that carried a chorus of whispers, "Stay, ours, forever," in voices that weren't human. Ryan yelped as cold fingers clawed at his back, leaving fresh welts through his shirt, while Emma screamed, her hair yanked by an unseen hand, her rabbit falling to the floor, its button eyes glinting as if alive. Laura's notebook, now on the coffee table, flipped open on its own, pages tearing as red ink scrawled across them. No escape. The mirror in the hallway cracked further, reflecting not the room, but a crowd of figures. Men, women, children, with scratched-out eyes, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands reaching out. Father Matthews pressed the crucifix to Mark's chest, shouting, "In the name of Christ, release this man." Mark's body convulsed, his screams blending with the house's roar, a deafening sound like 1,000 voices crying out in pain and rage. The holy water hissed on his skin, steam rising as if burning, and the floorboards buckled, splitting to reveal a dark void beneath, its edges pulsing like a wound. Laura pulled her children back, shouting over the chaos, "Mark, fight it. You're stronger than this. But Mark's eyes, now black voids, locked onto her, his smile widening, as if the house itself were wearing his face. You can't take them, he growled, his voice a cacophony of tones, some deep, some childlike, all wrong. The shadows grew bolder, circling the group, their forms coalescing into the tall, thin figure from the 1892 photo, the smiling man, his grin stretching impossibly wide, his eyes endless pits. Emma whimpered. It's him, pointing to the figure as it hovered near the basement door. Father Matthews, sweat streaming down his face, sprinkled more holy water, his prayers growing louder, but the house retaliated. The attic hatch above Emma's room slammed open, releasing a torrent of cold air that carried a giggle, high-pitched, childlike, and chilling. A family photo fell from the wall, its glass shattering, revealing a new image. The Andersons, their faces scratched out, standing beside the smiling man, his hand on Mark's shoulder. Ryan's phone, left on the couch, turned on by itself, playing a distorted audio clip of Mark's voice. They belong to me. Laura, her voice breaking, shouted, Mark, we love you. Come back. The priest, his hands shaking, pressed on, chanting, Domini, labora hanc familiam. The shadows recoiled, but the house's hum grew louder, the walls pulsing as if alive. A crack split the ceiling, dust raining down, and a mural in the dining room, a faded pastoral scene, began to bleed, dark streaks dripping like tears. The entity within Mark laughed, a sound that shook the foundation, and said, This house was built on blood. You're part of it now. Laura's heart sank, realizing the battle wasn't just for Mark. It was for all of them, and the house was fighting to keep them forever. The battle in the living room of 47. Maple Lane had turned the house into a living nightmare, its walls pulsing with a malevolent will that fought Father Matthew's prayers with shattering glass, crawling shadows, and a chorus of inhuman voices. Mark Anderson, fully in the grip of the entity, writhed on the floor, his body contorting, his voice a layered cacophony, snarling. This house was built on blood. You're part of it now. Laura clung to Ryan and Emma, her heart pounding as the air grew thick with the stench of decay and a metallic tang that seemed to seep from the very foundation. Ryan, 12, his neck and back burning with fresh welts from unseen claws, pressed against his mother, his skepticism long gone. Emma, 8, sobbed in her stuffed rabbit, whispering, He's everywhere, Mommy. The house's hum, a low, relentless pulse, throbbed through the floorboards as if it were alive and ravenous. Father Matthews, his face slick with sweat, clutched his crucifix, his prayers faltering under the weight of the house's resistance. As the priest chanted, Domini, labora hanc familiam. Laura noticed the basement door, still ajar, pulsing with a faint, dark light, like a heartbeat in the shadows. The entity within Mark laughed, a chilling sound that shook the walls, and said, You can't break the bond. Father Matthews, his voice hoarse, turned to Laura, his eyes wide with realization. What are you? He demanded, pressing the crucifix harder against Mark's chest. The response came in a voice that wasn't Mark's, a layered guttural growl that seemed to rise from the house itself. We are the house. Built on blood, fed by fear. They are ours. The priest's face paled, and he whispered to Laura, This isn't just a demon. This house was built on something unholy, a sacrifice, a ritual. It's alive because of it. Laura's mind raced to the rusted metal box she'd found in the basement, its contents hinting at a dark history. Ignoring the priest's warning to stay put, she sprinted downstairs, her flashlight shaking as it cut through the icy, rancid air. The basement was colder than ever, the concrete walls slick with moisture that glistened like blood. The scratches she'd seen before, mine forever, no escape, had spread, forming a sprawling web of symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. She pried up the loose floorboard again, finding the box now heavier, its lid etched with new carvings, a wide, smiling face with empty eyes. Inside, alongside the scratched-out photos and the 1892 image of the smiling man, was a brittle journal, its pages yellowed and stained. Dated 1890, it described a cult that built the house on a sacred site, a place where blood was spilled to bind an entity to the land. The final entry, written in a frantic hand, read, "The house chooses its own. The smiling man is its voice. It never lets go." Laura's blood ran cold as she realized the smiling man Emma described wasn't a ghost but the house's will, a force woven into its walls, feeding on its occupants. She stumbled back upstairs, the journal clutched in her hands, as the house roared. A sound like 1,000 screams trapped in the foundation. Mark's body convulsed, his eyes black voids, his smile stretching wider, mirroring the journal's description. The shadows on the walls thickened, forming figures, men, women, children, with scratched-out eyes, their hands reaching out, whispering, "Stay with us." Ryan screamed as his welts burned, new scratches appearing on his arms, while Emma's rabbit fell to the floor, its button eyes now missing, replaced by dark, empty holes. Father Matthews, his voice breaking, shouted, "This house is its vessel. You must leave tonight." But the house fought back. The basement door slammed shut, trapping Laura inside for a moment before it creaked open, releasing a gust of air that carried her name in a chilling whisper. The ceiling cracked further, dust raining down, and the dining room mural, its pastoral scene now a mass of bleeding streaks, dripped onto the floor, forming words, "Ours forever." Laura, clutching the journal, showed it to the priest, her voice trembling. "It's not just Mark. It's all of us. The house wants us all." Father Matthews nodded, his face grim. "We've weakened it, but it's tied to the land. As long as you stay, it will return." The shadows retreated slightly, the hum softening, but the silence was worse. A predatory pause, like a beast waiting to strike. Mark's convulsions slowed, his breathing shallow, his eyes flickering back to normal, but his hands still twitched, as if the entity lingered. Laura gathered her children, her resolve hardening, but as she looked at the basement door, it creaked wider, its darkness beckoning. Emma whispered, "He's still here, Mommy. He's angry we fought him." Ryan, his voice small, pointed to his phone, which had turned on by itself, displaying a new photo. The family in the living room, their faces scratched out, the smiling man standing behind them, his grin wider than ever. The house was far from done with them. The Battle of 47. Maple Lane had left the Anderson family and Father Matthews battered. The house's malevolent will momentarily subdued, but far from defeated. Mark, his body racked from the entity's possession, lay slumped on the living room floor, his breathing shallow, his eyes flickering between his own and the dark, endless voids of the smiling man. The air was still thick with the stench of decay and a metallic tang, the walls pulsing faintly, as if the house were catching its breath. Laura, clutching Ryan and Emma, her hands trembling from the journal's chilling revelation. A cult's blood ritual, binding an entity to the house, felt the weight of Father Matthew's warning. It's not gone, only dormant. The house is its vessel. As long as you stay, it will return. Ryan, 12, his neck and arms marked with fresh welts, clung to his mother, his phone forgotten, while Emma, 8, whispered into her eyeless stuffed rabbit, "He's still here, Mommy." The house's hum, though softer, lingered, a reminder of its hunger. Father Matthews, his face drawn and voice hoarse, urged Laura to act. "You must leave, tonight," he said, his crucifix still clutched tightly, its edges worn from the battle. Laura nodded, her resolve hardening despite the fear gnawing at her. She gathered essentials, clothes, the children's favorite toys, a few photos, leaving furniture and memories behind. The house seemed to watch, its windows dark but alive, reflecting their movements like unblinking eyes. As they packed, the floorboards creaked without cause, and the basement door, now closed, rattled faintly, as if the entity were pacing below. Ryan, his voice small, pointed to his phone, which had turned on again, displaying a new photo, the family fleeing the living room, their faces scratched out, the smiling man looming behind them, his grin impossibly wide. Laura shoved the phone in her bag, her heart racing, and ushered the children toward the front door. The house resisted their escape. The front door, unlocked moments ago, jammed, its handle ice-cold and slick as if coated in frost. Laura yanked at it, her hands burning, while the walls whispered, a soft, layered chorus of stay and ours. Father Matthews sprinkled holy water on the door, muttering a prayer, and it creaked open, releasing a gust of rancid air. They stumbled into the dawn, the Vermont sky pale and cold, the house looming behind them like a predator denied its prey. As they piled into their minivan, Emma, huddled in the back seat, whispered, "He's still with us. He said he'll find us again." Laura forced a smile, her hands shaking on the wheel, telling herself it was just fear talking. But as they drove away, the house's windows seemed to follow them, their reflections showing not the road but the smiling man's face, his eyes black voids. In their new apartment an hour away, the Andersons tried to rebuild. Mark, though himself again, woke screaming from nightmares of a wide-smiling figure standing over him, its hands reaching from the shadows. He refused to speak of the house, his eyes darting to mirrors as if expecting to see it again. Ryan found scratches on his apartment door, faint but identical to those in the basement, forming the word mine. He stopped using his phone, terrified of new photos appearing, and his welts, though fading, burned at night. Emma drew pictures of the smiling man, his black eyes and wide grin haunting her sketchbook, and whispered, "He misses us, Mommy." Laura burned the journal and photos from the rusted box, but the ashes seemed to writhe, forming fleeting shapes before scattering. At night, she heard 3 sharp knocks at 3 a.m., like those in the house, coming from the walls or windows, always unanswered. Laura, unable to let go, researched the house's past in the campus library, finding records of families who'd lived at 47. Maple Lane, some fled, others vanished, all linked to whispers of rituals and a smiling man. A 1901 newspaper clipping mentioned a fire that never spread beyond the house, as if the land itself contained it. The cult's ritual, she learned, had bound the entity not just to the house but to the ground, a sacred site where blood was spilled to awaken something ancient. Wherever they went, Laura feared it could follow. One night, she woke to find Emma's rabbit on her bedside table, its empty eye socket staring, though she'd packed it away. The knocks grew louder, and a faint whisper, "Laura," slipped through the apartment's silence, as if the house's reach stretched far beyond its walls. The Anderson family's escape from 47. Maple Lane left them scarred, haunted by the house's lingering presence. The 3 a.m. knocks, the scratches on Ryan's apartment door, and the eyeless stuffed rabbit that reappeared in their new life. The Victorian house in Blackwood, Vermont, stood empty once more, its sagging gables and dark windows silent but watchful, as if waiting for its next prey. Laura's research had uncovered its blood-soaked history, a cult's ritual in 1890 binding an entity to the land, with the smiling man as its voice. But the house's hunger remained, its walls pristine, as if it had erased its scars to lure new occupants. By spring 2019, the Thompsons arrived, a family of 4 unaware of the house's past, their smiles bright with hope as they carried boxes through the creaking front door. David Thompson, 40, a contractor with a knack for restoration, saw the house as a project, its Victorian charm a canvas for his skills. His wife, Claire, 37, a high school teacher with a love for history, was enchanted by its arched windows and carved banisters, oblivious to the neighbors' wary glances. Their sons, Ethan, 10, curious and bold, and Noah, 6, sensitive and quiet, raced through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing where the Andersons' screams had faded. The realtor, a different one from the Andersons' time, rushed through the tour, avoiding the basement and muttering about a motivated seller. David laughed it off, saying, "Old houses have stories," while Claire admired the restored mural in the dining room, its pastoral scene now free of the bleeding streaks that had tormented Laura. The first night, as the Thompsons unpacked, the house was deceptively calm, its air cool but free of the metallic tang that had plagued the Andersons. Ethan set up his toy cars in his room, while Noah arranged his stuffed animals, humming softly. But as the clock struck midnight, Noah paused in the living room, tilting his head as if listening to something in the silence. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice soft. "He already told me. This is his house." Claire, unpacking dishes, laughed, thinking it a child's fancy, but her smile faltered when she noticed the basement door, locked when they moved in, now slightly ajar, a faint hum drifting from its depths. By the second day, subtle signs emerged. Ethan found one of his toy cars, a red Mustang he'd left on his nightstand, placed perfectly in the center of his bed, its wheels aligned as if driven there. "Weird," he muttered, but shrugged it off, posting a quick X update. "New house, new pranks?" #moving life. Claire, organizing the kitchen, noticed the faucet dripping, each drop echoing in a rhythm that seemed to form her name. She tightened it, but the dripping resumed minutes later, louder, more insistent. David, inspecting the basement for renovation plans, found a faint scratch on the concrete wall. A single word, "Welcome," carved fresh, its edges sharp. He frowned, assuming vandalism, but the air grew colder as he stood there, a whisper brushing his ear. "David." He spun around, finding nothing but shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. That night, Noah woke screaming, claiming a smiling man had stood at his bedside, whispering that the house loved him. Claire, soothing him, noticed the attic hatch above his room, sealed when they moved in. Now slightly open, a cold draft carrying a faint, childlike giggle. Ethan, trying to be brave, climbed a chair to close it, but found a small, faded photograph wedged in the frame. A family from decades ago, their faces scratched out, except for a tall figure in a dark suit, his smile unnaturally wide, his eyes black voids. The back read, "Property of the house, 1892. Claire's heart sank, her historian's curiosity warring with a growing unease. She hid the photo in a drawer, but the house's hum returned, louder now, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat. By the third day, the Thompsons' excitement began a fray. David, usually steady, grew irritable, snapping at Ethan for leaving tools out. Claire found her books rearranged, their pages open to passages about blood rituals and sacred sites, though she hadn't touched them. Noah drew a picture of the smiling man, his grin stretching across the page, and whispered, "He says we belong here." Ethan, shaken, posted on X, "This house is creepy. Something's watching us. #haunted. The neighbor's warnings, overheard at the grocery store, echoed in Claire's mind. That house doesn't let go. As night fell, the basement door creaked open again, and the hum grew louder, the house waking once more, its hunger renewed for a new family to claim. The house at 47, Maple Lane, stood silent once more, its dark windows glinting like eyes in the Vermont twilight, its walls hiding the scars of the Anderson family's nightmare. The Andersons had fled, marked by the house's relentless grip. 3 a.m. knocks, scratches on their apartment door, and Emma's eyeless stuffed rabbit whispering of the smiling man who never let go. Laura's research had uncovered the house's origin. A cult's blood ritual in 1890, binding an ancient entity to the land, its voice embodied in the tall, grinning figure that haunted their dreams. Now, the Thompsons, David, Claire, Ethan, and Noah, had moved in, their laughter and hope already fraying under the house's subtle, predatory influence. The scratched-out photograph, the dripping faucet, and Noah's whispers of the smiling man signaled that the cycle was beginning anew, the house waking to claim its latest prey. As the Thompsons settled into their first week, the house's presence grew bolder. At night, the basement door creaked open, releasing a faint hum that pulsed through the walls, matching the rhythm of their heartbeats. Claire, her historian's curiosity turning to dread, found her books rearranged again, open to pages about blood sacrifices and entities bound to sacred sites. David, inspecting the attic for renovation plans, discovered a hidden panel behind the hatch, etched with symbols that matched the basement scratches, a wide, smiling face with empty eyes, surrounded by words in a language he couldn't read. When he touched it, the air grew icy, and a whisper hissed his name, David, from the shadows. Ethan, 10, woke to find his toy cars arranged in a perfect circle around his bed, their headlights inexplicably glowing in the dark. Noah, 6, drew more pictures of the smiling man, his crayon strokes frantic, whispering, "He says we're home now." One night, as Claire tucked Noah in, she noticed the attic hatch above his bed, sealed that morning. Now ajar, a cold draft carrying a childlike giggle that wasn't his. She climbed a chair to close it, her hands shaking, and found a new photograph wedged in the frame. The Thompsons on move-in day, their faces scratched out, the smiling man standing behind them, his grin wider than ever. The back read, "Property of the house, 2019. Claire's heart stopped. The date was impossible, as if the house had written it moments ago. She hid the photo, but the hum grew louder, the walls pulsing, and Noah whispered, "He's happy we're here, Mommy. He wants us to stay forever." The neighbors, watching from a distance, whispered of lights flickering in the house's windows, of screams carried on the wind. A local historian, contacted by Claire, revealed more. 47. Maple Lane had been built on a site where sacrifices were made long before the cult, a place where the land itself hungered. Families who lived there either fled or vanished, their names erased from records as if the house consumed them. The Thompsons, unaware, continued unpacking, their smiles fading as the house's pulse quickened. David found more scratches in the basement, hours carved deeper each day. Ethan's phone, left charging, turned on at night, playing a distorted audio clip of Noah's voice. This is his house. Claire, sleepless, heard 3 sharp knocks at 3 a.m., echoing from the walls, and saw shadows move in the corners, always just out of sight. The house at 47, Maple Lane, stands as it always has, its walls waiting, its silence a predator's pause. It's not haunted, it's alive, a vessel for an entity older than the town, fed by blood and fear. The Andersons escaped, but the knocks, the scratches, and the whispers in their dreams prove the house's reach is long. The Thompsons, now settling in, have no idea what watches from the walls, what grins in the dark, what writes their names in the shadows. Would you dare to live in a house that knows your fears? Would you sleep soundly, knowing it dreams of you? Or do you believe some places are better left empty, their doors locked, their secrets buried? Because once a house like this claims you, it never lets go. And somewhere in the silence of 47 Maple Lane, it's waiting for you. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell.